and welcome once again to Quiet RC. As usual, I am Rob. Today we are sticking with on-road and we are sticking with small. And we're going to talk about the Carten M210R Plus. Oh, and actually this is kind of like a 225 Plus because I did like the little conversion. Anyway, you'll see about it. Shh. The first question we should probably look into is, what's with the name? Let's break it down. M210R Plus. M for mini. The R, probably racing. Plus, because this particular kit comes with some extras like turnbuckles and gear diff and aluminum shock bodies, threaded shock bodies. And of course, the 210 refers to the standard kit wheelbase. I went ahead and purchased the 225 millimeter conversion kit, which just consists of a lower deck, a top deck, and the drive shaft. And that's all you need. Everything else is just on the ends, so it doesn't matter how far apart it is. The 210 and 225 are two of kind of the standard wheelbase lengths that you can make with Tamiya Mini chassis. Some of them just come as 210 or 225. However, more recently, you've been able to kind of shrink or expand them depending on what you want to run. For whatever reason, I think the one in the middle, the mid-size one, the 225, is just kind of perfect for me. That's why I've chosen to get the extra chassis conversion kit that you can get from Carten. Of course, it gets delivered. This one, I believe, was from either Austria or Germany is where I ordered this from. We'll get into kind of the American side a little bit later. As always, they come and they're marked as toys on the package, which is, you know, a little humbling. Now, as you are starting the kit, you start with the steering, and actually this is one of the first things I would probably go back and just order the upgraded steering. The steering that comes with it is plastic with plastic bushings. One of the kind of interesting, because the rest of the kit is really all high-end. I don't know why this particular spot, they stuck with just the plastic for the Plus version of this kit. There's quite a bit of slop in it. I have other problems that are more on my side of the actual driving versus how the kit's put together. Now, if you've seen my previous videos, and I think actually the video that came out right before this, I had a little bit of a rant on things coming pre-assembled. In this case, the shocks and the gear diff and the front spool all came pre-assembled. When I went to open the kit, there was a lot of grease kind of around the bags and things like that because the diff or maybe the shocks, I can't remember which one, had actually leaked a little bit, so I ended up having to tear them all down anyways. That's a good idea regardless. Just go ahead and even if it doesn't seem like things have leaked out, go ahead and just tear it down and rebuild them. Now, I had the correct diff weight oil on hand, so I was able to use that to rebuild the rear diff. When you were building the rear suspension, the instructions, well, very good overall. They did actually have a couple of like errors and a couple of little kind of quirks about them that made it just a little bit difficult. Not really that difficult, but just a little bit kind of, you had to be aware of what you were actually doing when you were building the kit. For example, the rear, where the actual hinge pins mount, the ones that were supplied in the kit were, let's see here, 3 degrees, and I think the kit illustration had maybe 2.5 or 2, so I was kind of like looking around for possibly they had included others, but no, just the 3.0, so that's what's in there. So it's got a little bit of an aggressive rear toe in, which is fine. I need kind of a little more help with kind of steering and handling, so that helps a little bit. As I mentioned, the front spool came pre-assembled. That's what the Plus kit comes with. However, when you're looking at the instructions, it's another case of it seems like they're telling you to put it together. So you're kind of looking for these parts, not realizing that the spool is actually pre-assembled. And when you look at the spool, it actually kind of looks like just one piece, but it's actually a few pieces that are put together. So another thing, I mean, it's great that they actually provide the instructions on how to put it together if you ever need to tear it apart, but just one thing that's kind of like, all right, well, did I do this right or did I not do this right? The last interesting thing about the instructions is what they do is they do list out the like hardware that you're gonna need for each step, which is great, but what the instructions also do is they kind of provide instructions on each of the different levels of kits that they provide, whether it's just the 210, the R or the R Plus, and they kind of put them all together. So when you are looking at it, you have to make sure like, okay, I'm looking at the actual instructions for what's provided in the kit that I purchased, However, on the side, let's say this step requires 2 8mm button heads. Well, if they have 2 different sets of instructions next to each other, they'll actually put 4 button head 8mm screws. You're not miscounting, it's just that they're kind of counting every single screw that appears on that page of the instruction, not taking into account that you're only going to use half of those or a third of those. Well, I've got you confused. Maybe kind of wander down to the comment section. Feel free to comment about any of this build. But most importantly, please give us a like and please give us a subscribe. We're super close to hitting my goal that maybe I'm about 2 months behind of where I wanted to be. That's fine. I appreciate all the help you guys have given me and all the support in the comments and the subscriptions and the likes. Very much appreciated, but let's keep it up. Thank you. When putting together the center drive shaft, especially in the rear, everything is very tight, but just have confidence that that is just more due to very good build quality versus maybe they're not fitting right or you have the wrong part selected. It is very tight and it does fit in there. When you're actually putting in that rear center drive shaft with the spur gear, you're gonna have to kind of do some, once you put in that spur gear, you're gonna have to turn a little bit to get some of the pieces to fit in there right. But again, it's just because everything fits so well together that you do have to kind of massage the parts in there. Speaking of the spur gear, when putting on the spur gear, like a lot of spur gear just has like a ton of different holes in the center of it that you're actually going to put your screws through to attach it to that center hub. When I first did it, I picked just barely the wrong hole. And that kind of put the whole thing off just a tiny bit. I had to back it all out because you could tell it was just off a little bit, and put them in the correct mounting holes there. As I mentioned again with the instructions, it's great because they do list out all the things that you're going to need for each step, but it is a little bit different because they don't bag everything by step. They put all of the same size screws together or all of the same size grub screws or ball ends, things like that. They put those all in the same bag. So when I took everything out and started to get going, I did try to keep those in the bag and kind of set them up. Now, as you've seen possibly in a previous video or as you're seeing in this video, I have made my own parts tray, so it's a little bit larger. Once I got kind of maybe about a third of the way through the instructions, I was actually able to take all of the screws out of the bags and put them into each individual compartments and kind of keep it together that way. What was nice about the oil kind of leaking out somewhere in the bag is that it made it really easy to peel off all of the stickers that had the size of the screws. So I was actually able to peel those off and just put those into my parts tray and keep everything organized that way. Get a parts tray, guys. You don't have to make one like I did, but I'm telling you, 1, 2, 4 parts trays changes your life as far as building kits goes, or even just tearing them down. And when you're having to repair things or put new parts in or upgrades, it makes life so much easier. Couldn't recommend it more. The front suspension now, as you're putting in the hinge pins, do be careful. There are some hinge pins that are very close in size. You don't want to get those turned around as to which ones go where. What you do want to know is that when the hinge pins go in, they will be completely flush with the actual arms and where they're actually mounted. So if you put a hinge pin in and it's not flush, you've got it in the wrong place. Go pick another hinge pin, get it to sit flush. You do put spacers in for the hinge pins in the arms and the rear. Again, make sure you're getting the right size for those. It's 2.5 millimeters, I believe, for the rear hinge pins where you're actually putting the spacers in, and it is important which side of the hinge pin mount you actually put that on. So keep an eye on that. Earlier in this video and in previous videos, I've talked about my dislike of things coming pre-assembled in the kit, but I have to admit, they did provide all of the turnbuckles pre-built. That's pretty nice. Does save your fingers from putting those together. Credit where credit's due, that was kind of nice. And on top of that, pretty much all of them were the correct size or length that they tell you to do in the manual. So good for them. Thank you. Finishing out the front, you'll assemble hubs and the carriers up front. And as you're putting together the top deck, you do want to notice that in the manual, there is a little bit of a misprint as far as which exact screws you need. So again, don't second guess yourself too much. You might just have the right thing and they might actually have the wrong thing printed in the manual. So just keep an eye on that. As far as mounting the electronics, especially since I have the 225 millimeter conversion, so it's a little bit longer, there's plenty of room to put all my electronics on the lower deck. In the manual, they show them mounted on the upper deck. Don't really need that. And I think even if you had the 210, I mean, you're only losing 1.5 centimeters of total length. I think with as small as receivers and ESCs are, like you could fit everything on the lower deck just fine. So that's what I have. A really great thing about the manual is at the end, they actually have some extra instructions on the various hop-ups that you can get with the kit. With the M210R Plus, a lot of these particular hop-ups, like sway bars, for example, come with the kit. And while they're not explicitly shown in the instruction manual on the regular part of the instruction manual, in the back they do have instructions on how to build and put those sway bars, for example, in. One of the other hop-ups that I ended up getting was the top deck fan mount, which is a really trick little way to mount the fan in there. It looks really nice. One of the last things is you see that I have this body mounted on here, but when I first put it together, I actually just wanted to use kind of a little bit of a beat up body from my Tamiya M210R that I had. And what was great is when I went to go drop that on to kind of redo the body mounting holes, they were perfectly lined up. So these body posts from at least the 225, I'm sure the 210 version they do as well, line up with your Tamiya bodies already. So if you have a body or if you get a body kit and it has either holes pre-cut or just kind of little dimples of where they would be on a Tamiya kit, it seems like they line up perfectly with this Carten kit, which is nice. Let's get into some of the issues that I had. The biggest issue was when I went to go put on the Tamiya wheels that I have on here. When you look at the wheels and tires, specifically the wheels, that are supplied with the Carten kit itself, the actual hex is recessed about maybe only half or 3/4 as much as a standard Tamiya wheel. What happens is when you put on the Tamiya wheel, it actually now kind of rubs part of the hub, both the front and rear. But that's not where the real issue came in. The real issue came in when I went to go tighten them down, because you can shim that out a little bit and then you're kind of fine. When I went to go tighten it down, what I ultimately found out what was happening, and the way that I found that out I'll get to, is the bearings were being crushed together and seizing up. The way I found that out is a real testament to kind of the whole RC community in general.
I got family.
I took it to the track and I would be going around, and when I let off the acceleration, I could see that it was slowing down way faster than just a regular drag brake. Came to find out that I was having this issue where the bearings were being squeezed together, or I could just see that the wheels were somehow seizing, and I couldn't really figure it out at that point. I was at the track, I hadn't even joined the Carten or the Carten 210 group yet. I joined the Carten group, posted a thing saying, hey, just got this, I'm having an issue where it seems like the wheels are seizing up, any recommendations? And at that point, I'd actually also kind of broken an arm and asked where I could get parts. I'll get to that in a second. But somebody replied within maybe 5-10 minutes saying, oh yeah, we've had that issue. We created crush washers to go in between the two bearings in the hubs, both front and rear, to stop those from getting smashed together. And the unfortunate part is this person's like, oh, we're over in Europe. Just to send you, these 4 washers would be way too expensive and really not worth it. But not like 2 minutes later, somebody from a US-based distributor of Carten parts replied. At this point, I had realized that I had broken an arm and started to look for parts, and that's where I was like, oh no, like this is gonna be very difficult to get parts for, which is something you probably should watch out for when you first buy a kit.
Idiot.
If it's not just kind of like a Tamiya or Traxxas or whatever kit that's really kind of prevalent here in the US. And I was getting worried. I was like, I'm not gonna be able to get parts for this thing in a reasonable amount of time or for a reasonable amount of shipping costs. A couple minutes after posting that issue in the Carten Facebook group, somebody commented from a place called Wolfram RC. A guy's name is Nick. And he's like, hey, we're now the first distributor in the US to have parts. Sure enough, I ordered from them. A few days later, literally a couple days later, I had Carten parts at a reasonable shipping cost, and the parts themselves are really reasonably priced. Now that brings me all the way around to one of the issues that I'm having with this car. I think some of the parts are kind of fragile. Even though my driving is not the best, there were a couple hits that I felt the car should have been able to take okay. All right, right, so having put together that little montage, maybe my driving was a little bit more to blame. Yeah, maybe that's it. Also, it's a new camera that I'm using and a new lighting, and I also think I had bad blocking of the lighting, so it looks like I'm very sickly, but I'm not. I'm fine. But I also do have a toddler and 16-month-old twins, so I could also be sleep deprived. And I have since broken 2 arms, broken the bumper twice, and I have snapped a drive shaft, which that was really an odd thing to break. Like I said, I was able to get parts. Let's go back to the parts, specifically the crush washers. Not available anywhere. Carten doesn't make them. They should, because this does seem to be an issue. I was like, well, how am I gonna make a crush washer? I feel like I'm saying it weird, but crush washer. Yeah, right? Okay. So I go back to my kind of remedial woodworking roots. We use this thing sometimes called a crosscut sled, which allows you to make perfect 90-degree cuts better than a miter saw could. I actually also have a miniature table saw. So ultimately, I kind of ventured onto this side quest where measured everything out, figured I could buy brass tubing with the correct inside diameter and the correct outside diameter, and obviously that would leave the correct wall thickness of the tube. But how was I going to get them into 1.5 millimeter wide kind of washers with perfect sides? I was going to create my own miniature crosscut sled and then use that to make these crush washers out of brass tubing that I ordered off of Amazon. And then I could make sure with a stop block that I was getting the same size over and over again. Some trial and error, getting the right size, even though you measure it all out. I did manage to make 4 identical brass crush washers out of the brass tubing. Got them on here. Now I don't have any issue with the wheels binding up. How does this compare to driving a Tamiya Mini? For whatever reason, I love the Mini scale, even though they don't really race it around here. Obviously, you can take any car you want pretty much to a track. If you have one nearby, it doesn't matter if they race, you can still run it on the track during open sessions or whatever. But even though I'm not very good at driving them, I've just kind of been obsessed with the size of it. As I mentioned before, I do have the Tamiya M210R, which is their rear-wheel drive, kind of mid-motor mount mini chassis that they have. I like a lot of things about it, but I just don't love the way it handles. I really prefer the handling of four-wheel drive touring cars. Aside from one model that I know of, which is their TA05 based M05, I think. They really don't make a four-wheel drive version of their mini chassis. There's some thought that maybe with this new MB01 chassis that they've come out with, that maybe that'll be able to be converted to four-wheel drive. But because Tamiya does like to have kind of jack-of-all-trade chassis, which comes in very handy in a lot of different situations, does tend to make them a little bit heavier and sometimes even more complicated than they need to be. This chassis, for example, it's four-wheel drive, it's the same size, obviously uses the same posts, bodies, everything that are available for the Mini. It weighed in at 1160, kind of fully loaded. My M08, which again is just rear-wheel drive, weighed in at 1210. About a 4% difference, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it is a lot. And a lot of this weight is very low. Because it's four-wheel drive, it helps a lot with the actual handling. Now, I could probably spend more time dialing in my M08, but it does have kind of fewer options available, just the way the motor's mounted in there, as opposed to kind of more standardized mount that this has, more standardized pinion and spur options. So it does allow for more options for tuning. Well, anyways, I hope you kind of get that I really do like the car. Again, my only issue with it right now is it's a little fragile. I never really want to switch to aluminum arms because you switch to aluminum arms and something deeper within the car is going to break when you have a bad hit. I looked into how much the aluminum arms are for this car and they're like 30 bucks a piece. That's a little rich. I'll just stick with the plastic, get a few extra because they're only like 7 or 8 bucks for the set of 4, which is not bad. I just wish it was a little bit more robust. Part of the problem might be is that it seems to be some sort of carbon reinforced or graphite reinforced plastic, but in the end, I think that just makes it a little brittle. It'd be nice if it was just a little bit kind of, for lack of a better term, like a softer plastic that would allow it to take some hits, bend back into place. Other than that though, super fun to drive, handles really well, really quick. Everybody at the track was having a fun time seeing it because they don't see a lot of the Minis come through. And this is certainly a unique brand. especially now that I know that parts are available via that Wolfram RC. Again, I'm just giving them a shout out because they kind of reached out and helped me have a better time with this car. The whole RC family really helped out in that situation, and they were good service. So what can I say? They get a free shout out. At any rate, that's all I've got to say. Please remember to like and subscribe. Plenty more builds coming up. Fun stuff in the hopper. And we'll talk RC again later. Thank you.